So their bourbon is good and they make a lot of it. 3.5 million gallons a year. We went inside to see how the process works.
You want to start with some good, clean, high-quality raw ingredients. Namely, for us, we make corn, rye, and malted barley.
Step 1, the mash. You make the cornmeal mash.
The way you make mash is you grind up a grain into a meal, like cornmeal, and you drop it into water, and then once you mix that together and heat it, that becomes a mash.
Step 2, yeast. Believe it or not, the yeast is one of the secret ingredients.
We have a yeast strain that we isolated in the 30s, and we actually have used that ever since. And we actually use the same yeast strain for all of our bourbons, and we guard that pretty closely. That's a very key ingredient.
These 92,000-gallon fermentation tanks are the largest in the world. Inside, the yeast goes to work, turning the sugar into alcohol.
This is called fermentation. It takes from 3 to 5 days. There's nothing stirring the product, nothing stirring it, no air being blown in. That is actually the yeast working, consuming the sugars in the mash. They're doing all the activity that you see here.
The result of all that activity? Beer?
We call it beer because after it's fermented, it's about 7.5% alcohol. And once it becomes beer, then we send it to the still house and distill it. Distillation is a critical step in the production of the bourbon.
That's because distillation is how you get the alcohol out.
Behind me is the still, the bourbon still. It is a 40-foot tall, continuously operating still, meaning the mash enters the top, the mash dribbles down. The mash is met by live steam, which extracts the alcohol. They can run about 500 barrels in one 10-hour shift through that, and each barrel holds 53 gallons.
The leftover grains wind up as cattle feed. Don't worry, there's no cow tippling going on. At this point, all the alcohol's been separated out.
The first distillation is coming out here. It's about 120 proof. We call it White Dog. It is basically what in the eastern hills of Kentucky they call white lightning.
White lightning, also known as old-fashioned moonshine. The second distillation is even stronger, 130 proof.
We double distill all of our bourbon. It removes some of the impurities, it mellows it out a little bit, and it raises the proof just a tad.
From here, it moves to another building where it is cut to 125 proof and then put in the barrel to age. At this point, it's still corn whiskey. As soon as it hits the barrel, it's officially bourbon. But remember, it's the aging that turns the White Dog red and gives the bourbon its complex flavors. Each barrel holds about 53 gallons of bourbon. Once filled, they're sent over to the rick house, a warehouse where the aging begins. Like any warehouse, the inventory is cataloged and put in its proper place. Nothing is left to chance.
It makes a big difference where we put our product on the upper floors and lower floors.
Top floor is similar to an attic, so generally it's always really hot, drier, and so that creates a different style bourbon. It'll age a little faster, it'll be a little hotter. You want to put a younger bourbon at the top because it'll generally age a little faster.
So now we wait. For years, the barrels are exposed to the heat of Kentucky's summer and the cold of its winter. Quiet now. Do you hear breathing?
During the daytime, the temperature rises, pressure gets inside the barrel, and it pushes the whiskey deep into the wood. And by doing that, then overnight it cools and it creates a vacuum and it's sucking air in and out. So that barrel is actually breathing over a period of years. If it lays there for 20 years, it's breathed for 20 years.
The barrel breath draws the alcohol in and out of the wood.
You are actually pulling your spices and stuff back out of the wood, and it creates a different taste.
At Buffalo Trace, bourbon is aged anywhere from 4 years up to 23 years for its most expensive brand. And this is one reason why premium bourbons cost so much. You're investing years in your final product. And every year you age a bourbon barrel, you must pay the angel's share.
When you fill a barrel, we put 53 gallons in the barrel, and it'll evaporate about 3% a year. And so that evaporation is what we call the angel share. You can smell it when you go into warehouses. But that also is a very important ingredient in the aging process, because when it evaporates, some of it also condenses back into the barrel. So you get this breathing effect in the barrel, and that extracts flavors from the woods.
In bourbon, it's all about the flavors. Each barrel ages differently, giving it a slightly altered flavor from its neighbor, or from any other barrel in the warehouse. These subtle differences in barrel flavors are captured to create premium bourbons. Small batch bourbons are made from a limited number of the better barrels. Buffalo Trace was the first distillery to make them commercially available.
For us, a small batch is 40 barrels or less. So what we do is we go out in the warehouse and we select barrels from floors that we know produce very good, high quality bourbon, and then we'll taste each of those barrels. And we'll pick 40 or less of those barrels to go into a small batch bourbon. We feel good about that product because we know each barrel is good, and we know it's a super high quality flavor at the end. So.
Even more exclusive, single barrel bourbons. Each bottling comes from a single barrel, such as Eagle Rare or Elmer T. Lee, one of only 3 bourbons named to honor a living distiller. Barrels are periodically tested to see how they are maturing. These 5 barrels of Eagle Rare are being tested to see which has the best taste. In a bourbon barrel, the cork is called a bung. The bung hole is what it plugs, and the tool to remove the bung, a bung jumper. The tool Obi is using to extract the sample is fittingly called a thief.
What he's doing is putting his thumb over the end of it and it catches the product inside.
Rodney and Leonard are comparing these 5 barrels of Eagle Rare. They were all made the same day and aged on the same floor of the warehouse.
One is going to be just a little bit better than the other. So, between the two of us, we picked number 4 there.
I would go with number 4.
We decided to throw Sledge into the mix to see what he's learned so far.
This one was much lighter, I think. These two were the smoothest aftertaste, but I think I like this one the best.
All right. That's the number 4 is the one really my pick.
So number 4 is the unanimous choice. It's ready for the next step.
Yeah.
I do think I need to taste these again.
Okay.